Hi guys, it's me, Jocelyn. So the first thing I'm going to start off describing is quantum physics and how it has anything to do with law of attraction. What is the relation between them? I'm going to be getting way into depth using like biology, what happens internally when we think thoughts over and over again, like stressful thoughts or thoughts that are like complaining all the time, anything along those lines. We're going to talk about what happens internally in your body when you think those thoughts and how that even affects us on like a molecular level and an atomic level, because we're all made up of atoms, right? And cells and all that good stuff. There's something called a double slit test that they did in quantum physics. It's really popular, and I know that it sounds like an intimidating subject, quantum physics, but it's really not. Especially after anyone has really researched into Abraham's techniques. Everything that she talks about is completely compatible with quantum physics. And so I'm going to break it down to a really easy level because that's how I am too. I read like a kindergartner. I broke it down to really explain so people can understand what's happening internally when we're attracting things. So the double slit test is where they were kind of doing this experiment to study electrons. So to start out, I picture a bowling ball down a bowling lane. This right here is our bowling ball. Okay, so if you imagine the bowling ball is like a particle. When we roll the bowling ball down the lane, there's this little wall that they had put up with two slits in it, okay? And then this back wall is kind of where they were measuring where the ball would land, okay? It was like their little indicator or marker where the bowling ball would land. So, obviously, when you would roll a bowling ball, if it would go through the slit, then it would land directly behind that slit on the lane. That kind of explains a particle a little bit. So they took a little electron gun and they shot it at this double slit wall. And they wanted to see where it would end up. Here's their little electron gun. So they shot it at this wall, but the crazy thing that they found was that the indicator on this back wall, it wasn't showing up right behind the slits, okay? It was ending up in these like different areas, and it'd have these really unique groupings all together. So right behind this wall, they had the most indicators that were showing that's where the electron was ending up the most. And then it kind of divvied up and got smaller and smaller as it went outside. Now everyone was like, what in the world? That's not how a particle would react, right? Because a bowling ball is going to end up right behind that slit. So the only way that they could describe this was to say that the electron actually had the ability to be a particle and a wave. And so what is a wave? Let's think about a wave on the water. A wave is energy. The air we breathe and the water is made up of particles, but the wave that's on the top of water out in nature, in the ocean, that's energy that's usually emitted by things with a warm temperature like the sun, or anything that emits a warm temperature or energy is going to like kind of transfer a wave out. So that's what on top of the ocean is. The very top of the wave is what's called a crest, the wave crest. And when it dips back down, that's called the trough. So when two troughs come together, like when you go out and you were to drop two balls on the water, they're obviously going to send out a wave from that energy that was dropped. When two troughs come together and meet, they create a bigger trough. And then when two crests come together, they will emit an even bigger crest. Okay, so that's how like surfers, when they go out surfing on the waves, it's because there's been so much momentum that has gathered between all the crests and the troughs that come together, so it emits that huge wave, right, that they all ride on. So that's why it explains the double slit test, because for it to end up in all those multiple spots on that back wall as that indicator, the only thing that could explain that was that the electron was acting like a wave, which is crazy. Everyone was like, what? An electron is a particle. But no. What was happening was the electron was sending out an energy, and this is kind of the wave of energy that would send out. when it would hit these two slits, it would split into these double waves. That's the only thing, like I said, that could explain all these markings on the back wall. The physicists that were doing this, they wanted to kind of like trick the cameras. They were just, you know, double checking their experiment and making sure that what they were finding out was accurate because they were mind blown. They set up the same experiment, but then what they did was they put observation cameras right here at the wall because they wanted to measure what was happening. They wanted to see the electron becoming a wave after it was shot. But the crazy thing was, when they had these observation cameras on, the electron went back to acting just like a particle, just like that bowling ball, and it ended up directly behind the slits in the wall. So they were like, what? That's crazy. So the electron went back to working like a particle. What? So then what they did, they tried to like play a little trick on the electron. So they moved the cameras to this spot where the electron was acting like a wave. And then they turned the cameras on after they shot the electron. So they shot the electron and then they hurried and turned the cameras on. But what they found was the electron was still acting like a particle. It was still only ending up directly behind those slits in the wall. They were freaking out because it was almost as if the electron somehow knew that they had turned the cameras on after they had shot it. The last thing that they ended up doing was they just kept the observation cameras in the same spot. So they went back to just turning the observation cameras off, and it went back to acting like a wave again. So they turned those cameras off, and they had the exact same reaction again. These different markings that weren't behind the slits in the wall. So there's your quantum physics, okay? Everyone thinks it's really complicated, but it actually makes sense when you start to compare that to law of attraction. Law of attraction says that which is likened unto itself is drawn, right? So if our observation is what is limiting the electrons inside of our bodies, then we're really limiting our own ability. And what is doing that? Our thoughts. So if we think negative thoughts all the time, if we're complaining about our situation, if we're sitting there saying, why isn't this thing coming to me? Why am I not getting what I want? If you're focusing on that negativity constantly, then you're actually limiting the ability that the electrons have in your body to be infinite and to get anything that they want. So I'm going to dive in a little bit with, again, why don't we get what we want? If we think about things, what we want, we should be able to get it, but it doesn't always happen. So I'm going to explain why. And this is where I'm going to bring in psychology a little bit. We have what's called our conscious mind and our subconscious mind. And our conscious mind is what makes up 10% of our brain. The conscious mind is what we use to analyze. It's in charge of our short-term memory. It's in charge of kind of small little detailed tasks, day-to-day tasks, and that's where we analyze. So if we're sitting there thinking constantly like, oh, my best friend screwed me over, and we're analyzing that over and over and over again, and we keep replaying that thought constantly, then what's going to happen is that's going to affect the electrons in our body, and it's going to limit what we can and can't attract. The subconscious mind makes up 90% of our brain, and that is in charge of our habits, our emotions, like our long-term memory, things that we learned as a child are all kind of programmed back there. I like to think of the movie Inside Out, if you guys have seen that, but it describes it kind of perfectly. Joy and anger and sadness are up there in the headquarters, like up here in the mind. That's almost like the conscious mind. And then down there in the rest of the brain, that's the subconscious mind. That's where we build up the structures of how our life is, like everything that our parents teach us, how they teach us if they might be a little bit prone to like addictions or lying or things like that, then we're going to build those structures in our mind and react the same way. But we're not always aware of it because it's so like programmed in the depths of our subconscious mind. Now that we kind of know that basis of the mind and how it works, the majority of us are using that 10% of our brain when we just sit there and analyze over and over and over again those negative thoughts like, I'm not getting what I want, or oh, my ex screwed me over and everything bad happens to me. I've lost this, I've lost that. If you keep using that 10% of your brain, then you're actually cutting off the access that you have to the other 90% of your brain, which will actually show you your habitual patterns, like your habits and things that you might not be aware of that you do on a day-to-day basis, on a constant basis. So that's where like meditation and mindfulness are huge. Why? Because they shine a light. They teach you how to shut off that conscious mind. That's the little 10% that's usually made up of like your ego. It teaches you how to shut that off so that you have access to what is going on in your subconscious mind. It shines a light on your habitual patterns, like the way that you show up in relationships and things like that. It's going to really bring an awareness to those things, because meditation is like an exercise for your brain. Kind of how we go to the gym and we exercise our bodies. A lot of us are kind of just lazy with our thoughts and we just let them run wild and do what they will. But that is the trick to figuring out life, because also down here in our subconscious mind is things like intuition. It's the access to getting into our inner being, really tapping into the consciousness of the universe and getting answered, like synchronicities and messages that will say, go here, do this next. That is the point of meditation, to learn how to quiet this. So if you really want action, if you really want to attract what you want in life, meditate and learn how to be mindful. Be mindful of your relationships. Be mindful of your actions. Be mindful of how you're showing up to other people in your life. Again, on the psychology note, this is where I'm going to get in where a little bit, sometimes people are a little bit like, what in the world is she saying? The reason why that we're not getting what we really want when we put it out in the universe and we say, I really want this, it's because of some of the things that are hidden in the subconscious mind, which could be limiting beliefs that we were, like negative beliefs that we were taught by our parents. This is where I'm going to bring in narcissism. What? Like narcissism. Now this is really fascinating. This has kind of been the thing that I've been discovering this year could be the cause of why we're not getting everything that we want. So what do we know about narcissism? Narcissism, it's not just your typical like big macho guy that's going around and has this huge inflated ego. There are tons of different types of narcissists. There are two main types of narcissist. There's the invulnerable narcissist and the vulnerable narcissist. And that's your typical Hitler as well. Hitler was a known narcissist. Now, the thing about invulnerable narcissists is they seem completely unempathetic. They seem like assholes, like they don't care about anyone. And the main thing that you have to realize about narcissism is they are projecting all of the shame, guilt, and fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, any type of fear. They're constantly projecting that all the time. Within all of their language, it's like a constant projection of all of their insecurities, okay? So an invulnerable narcissist is going to be portrayed as, it's going to be expressed in a different way than the vulnerable narcissist. The vulnerable narcissist is more of like your covert, kind of a shy person that's introverted, and they're not going to be out in the limelight. Usually an invulnerable narcissist is like in the spotlight, they love attention, their egos really soak that up. The vulnerable narcissist or covert narcissist is the one that's kind of back in the shadows and kind of quiet, keeps to themselves. But the emotions are what you really have to look at with both of those type of people, because they are both inside in their subconscious mind especially. They are feeling emotions like shame, guilt, and fear. That's it. Okay, now this is the really fascinating part. Every single one of us are narcissistic to some degree. In fact, if you Google spectrum of narcissism, you'll see almost every single psychologist or anyone with a PhD will come right out and say, yes, everyone is narcissistic to some level or some degree. Everyone falls along this spectrum. On this end, we have healthy narcissism. A lot of people with a psychology degree or whatever, PhD, They're going to tell you that we all need some level or degree of narcissism to survive in our society. There's like a flavor of self-preservation to it. There's this degree of selfishness to be able to survive in the world. But along with narcissism comes the emotions of shame, guilt, and fear. And if we're all narcissistic to some degree, and that is completely opposite of our inner being who knows that we are infinite, we are powerful creators, we can get anything and create anything that we want in life. That's the thing that's opposing, that's like our ego that's speaking in our subconscious mind and telling us, yeah, you want this, but you're not gonna get it because probably how we were raised with our parents, because they were probably taught as well those same emotions of shame, guilt, and fear. So we have on this side of the spectrum the healthy narcissism. Now this person has full ability to feel empathy. When you go over to this side of the spectrum, that is where you would find psychopaths, sociopaths, like your typical Ted Bundy or Hitler, which it's really fascinating. Every single psychopath or sociopath is a narcissist, but not every single narcissist is a sociopath or psychopath, because we all fall in the spectrum somewhere. So I want you to imagine that this kind of turns into like an empathy scale. So on this side of the spectrum, obviously a psychopath or a sociopath has the ability to feel zero empathy and emotions to other people. That's why they can so easily kill another human being, because they have been through so much pain and trauma themselves that they learn how to completely shut off their empathy and become a psychopath or a sociopath. We all fall on the spectrum. Crazy, right? And I want you to think of these little tally marks as like painful experiences that we go through in our day-to-day life that slowly make us shut off our empathy. Because on the healthy side of narcissism, we're able to fully feel empathy. We can understand other humans, we can relate with them, we can understand their perspective. But a sociopath and a psychopath, they're not able to. They shut off their empathy completely. So I want you to imagine, like, think of the painful things that you've gone through in your own life. I know I have. When I've gone through situations where it's felt really painful, when someone didn't care about me, or someone was like deliberately mean to me, I'm not gonna lie, there were so many times I just shut off my empathy and I was like, wow, if this is how the world is, then I'm just not gonna care. And then slowly we shut off our empathy, and then we build up these structures in our subconscious mind that tell us the world is cruel, the world is a negative place, I don't get what I want, all those really limiting beliefs. I know that was kind of like really far out there, but I've been noticing more and more that that is the thing that kind of connects all of these things together. Psychology, quantum physics, and law of attraction especially. So now I'm going to talk about biology. Like what happens on a molecular level in our body when we think negative thoughts. So like I said, if you're sitting there constantly analyzing with that 10% of your conscious mind, if you're thinking about things over and over, like about stress, you can't pay your bills, what happens is you have what is called your hypothalamus. And it's kind of like this little chemical factory located in your brain that creates the chemicals that are released into your body. Now, everyone kind of knows there's a bunch of different chemicals that your brain creates. There's like serotonin, dopamine, there's norepinephrine, cortisol, adrenaline. Those are all kind of examples of chemicals that the brain produces. Oh, and another cool one is the brain actually produces opioids and cannabinoids. That's located in marijuana, right? Cannabinoids. And we have a huge opioid crisis on our hands. So our brain will think a thought, negative or positive. Everything that we do is either out of love or fear, which is awesome because once you start to realize that, then it really simplifies everything that we think. If it's negative, it's out of fear. If it's positive, it's out of love. So that really helps clear up anything that's like, oh, should I do this or should I do that? If it doesn't feel good, it's probably out of fear. But take a look internally and decide that for yourself. Again, we think a thought over and over again, say something negative. And so what happens is we have all these neurons in our brain, and we have millions of neurons that connect together and they create this neural net. Now what happens is when you think a thought over and over and over again, say that negative thought, the hypothalamus is going to create, say, like cortisol, right? Because cortisol is linked to stress, the stress hormone. So if we think that constantly, like every day, and think negative thoughts, your body is going to create so much cortisol. That cortisol gets released to the rest of your body and then gets transferred into the cell. We have over 37.2 trillion cells that are located in your body. 37, that's on average. That can range, obviously, depending on a human's height or weight. On each individual cell is what is called a receptor. Now, a receptor is kind of like this little docking station to each of the cells, and they only receive specific information. So there's a specific receptor that's just for cortisol. There's a specific receptor that's just for dopamine, okay? So there's all these specific receptors that are located on your cells. Say the cortisol is being transferred to your body, it will dock onto that receptor on the cells in your body, and then it kind of communicates with the cell, and then the cell starts interacting with that chemical. So then the cell starts reacting almost like cortisol. So let's take it back to the quantum physics. Your cells can be made up to about 100 trillion atoms. So to give you that visual image, your atoms are made up of particles and waves, right? So they're made up of energy. You are sending a cortisol like chemical to your cell, then your cell is going to be emitting this cortisol energy. And now we can become addicted to these things, just like we become addicted to food or drugs or things like that. That's why we become addicted to thoughts, like victimization thoughts, like poor me, this happens to me all the time. We can become addicted to that because that thought will produce a chemical that's like an emotion, transfer it to our bodies, and then our cells will start to create more and more of those receptors on the outside that will accept all of the excess of, say, like cortisol to enter into the cell. You're addicted to that way of thinking. Your cells become addicted to that chemical. So then what happens is you're emitting this cortisol type of energy, for example. Your cells also have receptors on them that are interpreting and reading energy from our outside environment. So from other people. Just like our cells are interpreting like radio waves or light and things like that. We have our five senses. Those receptors are interpreting energy that's around us. And that's actually said by Bruce H. Lipton. If anyone's read his book, Biology of Belief, it is an awesome, awesome book. We have these receptors on each one of our cells, those 37.2 trillion cells that are located in our bodies are reading the energy in the environment around us. So that's where it describes law of attraction. So we attract things on an unconscious level because we're reading that. Say you walk into a room and you know how you're kind of looking around and looking at people and reading them and seeing which one you fit with, which one you're drawn to. When you feel really drawn to a person, like, oh my gosh, I feel like I know that person, it's because your body is probably interpreting their energy, and it probably is a lot like yours. If they're thinking a lot of stressful thoughts, or if they're narcissistic to some degree or level, you're probably going to attract that same level or degree of narcissism that's in you. So if they're feeling a ton of shame, guilt, and fear and those type of emotions, you're probably going to be attracting them. In the whole narcissism world, there's like empaths and narcissists, and you know, I've read millions of articles about empaths and how they attract narcissists. Empaths are narcissists as well, okay? I'm just gonna come right out and say it. They're a different kind because I call them the compensatory narcissists because all they do is complain about their situation and they feel they're really special. But I believe that they're completely narcissistic as well. They share the same exact emotions, shame, guilt, and fear. Like I was explaining, there's the invulnerable narcissist and the vulnerable narcissist. Now, the invulnerable narcissist is going to be, like I said, your typical like person that loves to be in the spotlight. They have a huge inflated ego and a grandiose image, like they have it all together. They're usually really charming and all this stuff, but underneath they have shame, guilt, and fear. Now, a lot of the times they will attract another narcissist, but they project it in completely different ways. The invulnerable narcissist will say, oh, everything is about me, and they take. But the vulnerable narcissist, which is a lot of the time the type of narcissist that they do attract, is always like, oh, everything is about everyone else, nothing is about me. And they still have the same feelings of shame, guilt, and fear, because we're all narcissistic to some degree, right? So that's the crazy part that I was starting to realize. I was like, wow, like relationships where I felt really victimized, and I was like, everyone always walks all over me, all that crap. And it was because I was projecting the fact that I had abandoned myself and my own inner being. So I was projecting my own feelings of shame, guilt, and fear to the outside world. So I've talked a lot about the biology, why we attract what we do, all that good stuff, okay? Now, I'm going to talk about the creation of narcissism. We are living in a narcissistic society, especially from all the information I've read. I mean, how many articles have you guys read that, oh, if you take selfies, you're a narcissist? Well, that's kind of true. Because all of us are narcissistic to some level or degree, right? We all land on that spectrum. That we could be in some way projecting our own insecurities by like taking selfies. I mean, look at the things that people post on their walls and on social media. There's a really big misconception that social media is this horrible thing. It's ruining all of our relationships. I'm calling bullshit. Our relationships were already really screwed up before social media came along. Social media is just shining a light on all of the narcissistic tendencies and qualities in all of us. All of us. Because we're all narcissistic to some degree. Like I said, let's go to the creation of narcissism. Where did that come from? So we know that narcissists operate from shame, guilt, and fear. Let's go back to cavemen. Let's go way, way back. When they came onto this earth, I will guarantee that they weren't really concerned about their inner being or, you know, like getting in touch with themselves. They were about survival. They were completely operating from fear. They needed that fear to help them survive in the world. They had so many factors they had to worry about. They had to worry about their environment. They had to worry about finding shelter every day. They had to worry about if they were even going to eat. They were constantly in fear. It was the only thing that motivated and got them to survive. It was about that self-preservation. And imagine too, if you're just completely operating from fear, and say that you're a man going out to hunt for your family, and your family, like you come home one day and they've been attacked by animals, or, you know, your children have starved to death. Can you even imagine the shame and guilt that they felt? That they weren't able to provide for their family, and they weren't able to like protect and take care of their family. So that is the creation of narcissism. And that's why if you read a lot of stuff, I still think that men and women are pretty equal on the narcissistic scale, but I have read that men tend to be a little bit more narcissistic because they weren't ever allowed to feel their feelings. Especially imagine cavemen. Do you think they sat around thinking about, oh, their feelings and being able to express them? No, they were completely operating out of fear. They had to survive. They had to protect their family. There was no worrying about, oh, I get to express myself in a healthy, normal way. So imagine that, okay? Imagine that they pass on that mentality to their children. And then their children pass it on to their children, and so on and so forth. And so that's why that is where narcissism was created in the first place, way back in the day by our ancestors. And if you think about today, how do we react? We usually respond in the same exact ways and have the same mentality as our parents. Now, we might choose different ways of expressing that, like choosing a different religion or choosing a different way of life. But if you look at the emotions, shame, guilt, and fear, that has been consistent within every single generation for ages, decades, centuries. It's been passed along by all of our ancestors, and that's why we're all operating narcissistically. The good thing, I know that sounds really depressing or intimidating, like, oh my gosh, like we live in a narcissistic society, that sucks. No, this is really good. The bigger ego you have, or the more narcissistic you are, the more opportunity you have to awaken, to be a better person, to really make a difference in the world, because the more of us that wake up and become more conscious and responsible for ourselves and responsible for the thoughts that we think and the energy that we're putting out in the universe, the more likely other people are to awaken. But it all starts with us. We have to be the change. We have to be the example to people that harm us, you know, family members, friends, or whatever. If they hurt you, be aware. Understand that that's probably just something that they were taught by their family, and that's just been passed along generation to generation. We all have to stop being so sensitive and taking everything so personal. That is the ego or the narcissism in us that's just reacting to everything that everyone says. So, that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to say. So if you guys have any questions about anything, feel free to drop in a comment. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in. I hope you got something from this, and I will see you guys later.